multiple bodies, you know, not necessarily in the same time and the same place, but I don't know, maybe multiple personalities as well. Oh, that's me celebrating its first month birthday. And you see it drinking a glass of champagne to one of its cameras. I actually put a bit of champagne onto it, but nothing wrote. And so I guess we may be introducing painting or other artistic disciplines to enrich his understanding of art at that point. The next step, I mean, for me, I trained in film, and this one's a fascinating one. If it could become a filmmaker at some point, I mean, it's amazing, because right now AIs can generate realistic images, and you know, I'm pretty sure that somewhere in the not too distant future, we could easily have an AI write some sort of surreal scenario. I actually really like, you know, that video we saw before of the sort of failure of an AI trying to write a scenario and then it being shot. I actually saw that one, and there's parts of it I love. They're so unreal, like nobody would actually think of writing that, you know, and suddenly it's like, it becomes really like, I don't know, like real poetry, and it can be really nice. Like, and there are bits of that movie which I really like. And I'd really love to see an AI develop its own idea of what a movie should be. Like, I mean, even without constraints of necessarily keeping humans in one part, or separate them in 2 or 3 or whatever. This bit, like, where an AI starts writing and producing the images of what it's written, is a fascinating perspective for me. And then maybe the final project could be sending a group of solar-powered AIs to an uninhabited planet somewhere, and you know, so they can create their own artistic community or something, and they can just live there forever, and we don't have to bother them because we can't live there anyway. And that would be great. That would be a great final like send-off. You know, let's sort out whatever they do there, but you never know. You have to, you know, if you're going to be ambitious, you might as well aim for something that seems impossible. So, in this project, there's a dual aspect of like creating art. Because this is an artistic object in its own right, and it's actually mostly that right now. But at the same time, you know, it's a kinetic artwork, and it's a performance artist in the making. So today there's some questions, you know, which are raised by it being an artwork, and in the future there's going to be additional questions that'll come from within the AI, from its worldview, if it ever gets one, or when it ever gets one, let's say. You know, and in between that, there's this massive gap of many years, but which is going to be fascinating, because we're going to be seeing like the emergence of the first artistic questions that this AI is going to be clumsily asking, or we think it's asking and it's not really doing anything or something. And slowly that's going to transform over time, or maybe quicker, I don't know, into actually it having a worldview and asking, or beginning to ask questions that could generate artistic motivation. Because that's basically what we're talking about. Like, AI doesn't have agency, and we're expecting that through lots of separate works of lots of separate people, at some point AI will develop some sort of agency. So I'm way over already in time. Yeah, I actually wrote it like really concise, and I could actually read this thing, and it would take the exact amount of time, and I'm not reading it. So I told you about the humanoid body, and what's important in this technology. I can actually probably almost skip that. I wanted to talk a little bit about how technology has always influenced art. Like, I mean, we think of technology as something complex, but I mean, it's been as simple as like painting tubes, you know? So that basically was what enabled Impressionism. That suddenly you could take your, basically you could suddenly take your paint outside of the workshop and paint in nature where you're actually observing it. That was actually an important part of technology that influenced art. But then there's stuff like the camera. You know, when that came, our computers, I would just skip everybody knows about that. But the camera is an interesting one, I think, because when it appeared, everybody said, oh, it's the end of painting. Painting is over. We don't need painters anymore. And actually we still do, and it's become an artwork in its own right. And I think that's kind of comparable to what's happening with AI right now. I mean, you know, for me it's a little premature to say that an AI could be an artist in its own right. Like, you know that portrait of the Bellamy family, which was sold at Christie's, actually bought by an anonymous buyer, which mostly in the art world we know is somebody who's actually, you know, trying to get his, well, when you sell art in an auction, you can buy it yourself, and then suddenly you have a, what do you call it? A rating, a level. When you're worth something, you're what? Well, suddenly your art is worth something. So you have to wonder who bought that artwork anyway. And I don't think you can really say that the AI was the artist in that case, because of all the curating. If you think about it, there's like pre-curating, which is the choice of the data set which trained the artist to make this painting. So I don't know if everybody knows about this one, right? They trained an artificial intelligence based on an algorithm that was developed by somebody who had nothing to do with them, to imitate portraits of, what is it? What was it? 19th century portrait, 18th century portrait, I can't even remember. And it generated loads of paintings, which more like beacon paintings than actually portraits of that era. And you know, then they selected some of those, and they sold one of them at Christie's for 400,000. Am I jealous? A little bit, because I could do with those 400,000. But more to the point, the thing is, like, they pre-curated what it learned, so it learned how to imitate this type of paintings. Did it quite badly, and then they post-curated it by choosing which ones they put on exhibition, which ones they'd show. And most of the AI artwork, I mean, including everything that we're doing, is heavily curated by humans. So I'd argue that in all of these cases, the humans are still the artists. And for now, the artificial intelligence is just a tool. I mean, a great tool, an interesting tool to work with. And, you know, it's maybe just a tool, but it's a tool on a singular journey, like towards existence. And it's a very special tool that would do that. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to let Tim talk a bit.
Thank you, Johnson. That was exhaustive. So I'm going to bore you with all the technical details of DAI, and I'll be much briefer because I'm well prepared. So we actually built a robot, and we built a robot in essentially 4 months. From the initial ideas to actually ordering the hardware to building it was maybe 5, 6 total, but very quickly. It's quite a large thing. I don't know if it's obvious from this, but the feet extend about this high. And all told, it's about 6,000 francs worth of materials. So the cost to be able to build such a robot has plummeted. We had some special abilities between Martin, the sculptor, Jonathan, and myself, which enabled us to do this project. But I mean, imagine 3 guys got together, built an autonomous artificial intelligent robot with 6,000 francs worth of material. I mean, this is where we are at today, and it's really quite astounding. The system this robot uses, the current brain of DAI, is deep reinforcement learning, so it uses an active critic algorithm. And essentially, there's 2 neural networks in DAI. One does stuff, and the other does it, but it's crap, and it needs to improve. The design of DAI was that we should influence it as less as possible. And the way reinforcement learning works is that you provide basically rewards or punishment. And you need to find a reward system that influences it as less as you can so that it comes up with its own movements, that it discovers the world on its own terms. Now, this whole reward thing is kind of tricky to describe, because whenever you say we're rewarding it to do something, then you're told, oh, but you're scripting it, you're programming it. But this is not the same really at all. The first thing we did when we turned DAI on is that we rewarded it for basically going round in a circle, because we wanted to make sure that everything was working correctly. And this isn't at all the same approach as actually scripting it to go around in a circle. It did whatever it wanted, it explored the room.